Now we're looking at problem 3, capital E from the summer packet. We have the limit as x goes to infinity of this square root of x squared plus 1 and then minus 2x. Now, unfortunately, if you try, direct evaluation where you start plugging this infinity in, you would end up with the square root of infinity squared plus 1 minus 2 times infinity. And so what happens here is you have infinity squared, which is infinity, plus 1. That's really not going to change anything. You still end up with infinity here. And then the square root of infinity is still infinity. And then minus 2 times infinity. Well, anytime you see something like this where you have infinity, either plus or minus, infinity, that ends up coming out to be what's known to be that indeterminate form that we've seen in the past, much like the 0 over 0. So unfortunately, that's not going to quite work. Okay, so there has to be some other method, though, that we can actually use that kind of helps us in determining what the actual solution is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead now and erase this, because unfortunately that just doesn't quite work out. Now, if we just look at the first piece, that square root of x squared plus 1, and we're trying to plug in this infinity term. Well, this plus 1 is actually really not going to change much, as we said a moment ago. So let's go ahead then and try things maybe more conceptually based. The square root of x squared, you can actually kind of think about this again, since this plus 1 is really not going to change anything. The square root of x squared, they end up actually just kind of canceling out and leaving you with just that value x. Minus, we still have our 2x. And again, we haven't actually applied the limit here as x goes to infinity. And when you actually simplify this out, we end up with the limit as x is going to infinity still of x minus 2x just comes out to be negative 1x. And now if you were to go ahead and plug in infinity, you would end up then with negative infinity as that limit. So again, the reason why we couldn't do the first method was because we actually ended up with that kind of like infinity minus infinity indeterminate form. However, just taking a step back and unfortunately, like, factoring won't quite work, rationalizing this won't quite work. And as a result, you kind of have to think about this more in a conceptual basis and breaking things down piece by piece. So again, that like plus 1 wasn't really going to change this limit because it's going to infinity. When you take the square root of this x squared, they kind of cancel, leaving you with just that x. And then, kind of just simplifying things down from there. This type of problem doesn't happen too often. But again, it's kind of just getting you in that mindset of processing some of these limits. This limit still would not exist, so it would be a DNE, and that's where you would see kind of like, like a vertical asymptote happening. All right, so again, that would be problem 3, capital E, from the Limits Summer Packet.